Hello. Good morning and welcome to Stagecraft. Today we're going to be talking about genies, fly systems, ladders, basically things that require you to go up. Okay? So most of you know what this is. It's called a ladder. In this case, it's an 8-foot ladder. A few things you might not know is that they're actually color-coded for weight. Okay? And most of them will have stickers that dictate this and tell you how to use them. Okay? It's pretty straightforward as far as most people are concerned on what ladders do. Okay? They take you from the ground up to go do work. When climbing a ladder, it's important to think about multiple points of connection, preferably 3 points of connection. You shouldn't be climbing ladders like this, right? You're gonna fall. Doesn't take a lot to hurt you if you fall. So, only one appendage should be moving at a time, right? Also, they're very clearly labeled, do not step past this step, right? You could go all the way up here if you needed to get your work done, and it's fine. A lot of ladders that get really big require 2 people to move them. This one's pretty manageable by yourself. Okay, as far as other safety goes on a ladder, that's worth talking about, is setting one up. You want to make sure that one, all legs are secure, right? All 4 are on the ground. If they're set up a little awkward, you can tell because, it wants to walk by itself, right? So you make sure all 4 legs are on the ground and that these are locked into place, right? And then you're good to use the ladder. Oftentimes, when working in a theater space, we need taller ladders than this. We do have ladders in this space that go up to 12 feet, give or take. You can get taller ladders. Most wooden ladders aren't really used anymore, and we don't use a lot of extension ladders. For those of you that might not know what an extension ladder is, that's a ladder you'd see like on the side of a house to get to the roof, right? Because you extend it and it locks in. But we don't use those a lot in theater because we're working in this space, right? It's tall, it's fun, everything's great. Often these things get a little awkward though, because you're standing on top, you have tools, you have to be able to manage a lot of things, you have to climb up and down with all your tools every time. And then it's nice to have a genie or a single man lift. As most things are in theater, we tend to call them by their brand names, and this one is actually a genie. There are a few different brands, but for what we do, everybody knows this is a genie. Okay, in this case, it's a single man lift. They do make them in a lot of different ways. Next door at the Pope Joy, they still use a hand crank one, which is kind of cool. And they can go really high. They vary in sizes and lengths. This one, as you can tell, the Genie, 25S, the 25 indicates how high the basket can go, okay? Often, you'll see them go up to 40. 40 is real fun, okay? So a few things we need to talk about before we use a Genie, because at some point you will be doing this throughout the semester. We'll get you some hands-on training to say that you've gone up in this lift, okay? So, setting it up. First thing is this one's a non-motorized. It has a motor that makes it go up and down, but it doesn't have a joystick that lets you control it. Those do exist, they're great, and they're horribly expensive. This one is a base Genie that has outriggers, okay? These bright silver things with crank handles are called outriggers. Anytime that you're in a Genie, going up and down, your outriggers should be down, right? There are 4 of them on this Genie, and if we come in close here, this is the control panel. There are 4 of them. You can look at the lights, and that tells you 2 things. One, that the connection point's been made down low, and that it's firm enough to go up. I wouldn't say level, but firm enough to go up. So, Clark, if you can come down here real quick. When we're installing the outrigger, right, which we'll do here in a second, there's a few different parts we need to think about. One is this release pin. Oftentimes, these get sheared off because people are just mean to them, okay? Or they're lazy. All of ours are safe and have them. So, you pull this out and you can push this in and it's sitting there. Often though, when you do that, or it has to be this way, it's obviously not going to be touching the ground, right? And if we look up here, that light is now off, okay? Meaning that there's no connection. Now, if I tighten this down just a little bit more where it's touching the ground, just barely, it's bright again. What we don't want to do, what we don't want to do is over-tighten these, right? Because if we over-tighten them, this light is still going to be green. But we start lifting up the whole Genie's corner, right? Which isn't a crazy big deal, except this goes up. And if we change it a little bit at the bottom, the higher up we go, the bigger angle we get. And we start to get unsafe. So all you have to do is really tighten it down until you feel a little tension, right? You're not trying to crank it up. Just a little tension. This light turns green, and if you can wobble it and not turn it off, you're solid, okay? Crank handle, screw, nothing big. The biggest thing and reason we have outriggers is because it basically makes your base wider, okay? Just like taking a wider stance in any sports ball game you want to play, it lets you have more balance, okay? So the higher up we go, the bigger the base or the heavier the base is, the safer we are. So we want to make sure our outriggers are out. Can we be up in the Genie with the basket all the way up with the outriggers not down? The party line answer and safe answer is no. You should not be up in a Genie with the outriggers not on the ground. It's just safety. In the industry, a lot of people will do that. You'll see them do it. They'll float their outriggers and they'll slide somebody along. It is easier for them to get their work done. Should they be doing it really though? No, they should not. So that's about it for the outrigger section of this. Let's move in close here if we can, Clark, to this wonderful little control panel. Okay? Control panel's pretty simple. We have an E-stop, the big red button. This isn't a button we use a lot. But if for some reason, say, Clark's up in there and doing some craziness and is going to hit something and he's not stopping and he can't hear me for some reason, I can walk up and go, hit that button, all these lights go off, the Genie stops, right? It will not move anymore until somebody manually comes over here and pulls that out again. We use E-stops a lot in theater. On almost every electric device that we have that is powered like this has an E-stop, okay? Moving up to the key switch. Often these keys are hidden and put in different places. Ours is actually mounted to the device, which is fine. When this is in, you can control a few different things. The neutral position, the Genie's not on. This is where it lives most of the time. If you want control to go to the various spots, the basket, this is what's referred to as the basket, you would put it into this position. If you wanted control from here, you could take control to here, right? Some of them will have full controls down here to where you can operate the human that's up there from down here. Not really advised though, right? But that's pretty much it as far as the buttons go. We have the down button. In case something happens to that human up there, you can always hit the button to bring them down. These two combined is what do that. If we look at a few other things here, we have our battery supplies, right? And these are just making sure that the battery's charged. When we turn it on, in this case, it actually says we don't have power, but we'll see if it actually, I think it might just, this one might just blink red when it gets low. So this one's only blinking red when it gets low. But that's all the controls as far as this goes. Now let's move around to the front. Okay. Move around to the front. So you can tell the operation panel here is a little less complicated because it's meant to be offered with one hand, right? Most of these will have a lot of different safety stuff on them. You should read them all. There's actually a manual in almost every one of these that's right here so that you can read it as well, right? If there's any issues or safety, we can look it up in those books. You have an auxiliary power here, so in case you need to bring a corded drill up top or something like that, you can do it. You have to plug it in the back, but it does work. So when we use this, the first thing, and this happens all the time, is you want to make sure this is pulled out, right? If you're actually in the basket, which I'll show you here in a minute. We want to make sure that this is pulled out, and there's a little up and down arrow right here. This is what's referred to as a dead man switch, essentially, because you have to push this button and hit up to make it work, okay? Same to go down. 9 times out of 10, if something's not working and you're in the Genie up top working, you're like, I can't get down. You hit this button with your hip, just not paying attention. And it's not a big deal. It's actually kind of why it's there, right? It's your stop. But that is the stop. Pretty simple on how it goes up and down. We'll get there in a second. These are all different. The entrance in our Genie is literally as simple as lifting a bar. Sometimes you got to turn a latch and lift the whole thing up. Sometimes it's a bucket. Kind of looks like a dumpster, but you know, we don't talk about that. So I think without too much further ado, we're going to actually set this last leg up, show you how that works, and then we'll go up and down a few times. When we do this in class, I want you to feel comfortable, and you'll go up as comfortable, or as high up as you are comfortable. Okay? I will tell you, the higher up you get, you'll feel a little wobble. I know we're in the desert, but for those of you who've been on a boat, it's a similar feeling, right? Because you're comfortable, you're secure standing on something, but there's a little bit of a wobble, okay? I can tell you my first time on a Genie, I did freeze. Freezing is when you're doing something in rigging normally and you just lock up. And what had happened was battens, which we'll talk about here in the next lecture, were swaying, I was swaying, and I could no longer tell what was moving. So I just sat down. And the goal is to never get you to that point, right? If you feel uncomfortable, past that little tingle of fixing to go on a roller coaster, probably just talk it out or relax a little bit, okay? And we'll see how high and how comfortable you are. So, probably can't see it too much, but over here, this is an outrigger, sometimes called legs. But you take your outrigger, place it into the slot. These retract by themselves, but don't slam them, because that's how you can break them. Sometimes they don't, and you have to pull the pin to put it in, like we looked at earlier. But, see how it's just barely floating? I can spin this, and when that light turns green on that control panel, we're done. So now we can see that all 4 of our lights are green, and we're good to go. We want control in this case to be in the basket. Okay?
Level.
We're getting there. So that's powered. We're good. We have control. There's only 2 other things that we should probably talk about before we get too far into it. So we talked about the level in hand tools, right? The little air bubble that moves back and forth to make sure you're flush. Well, if we look down here, we can see that there's a bubble and there's a little circle. You can tell we're leaning just a little bit out. I don't know how good the video is there, but we're mostly in the circle. We're fairly level, so we're good to go, okay? If you look at that and that bubble is way outside the line, we need to figure out what happened with the outriggers, because chances are somebody just over tightened it, or you're not on level ground, right? That could be an issue. So that is one, and the last one we're going to talk about is, I've never had this happen in my career, but it's good to know. There's a lever in the back, okay? We talked briefly about hydraulics and things like that, and it operates on a similar methodology. There's a little red lever underneath here that if for some reason the Genie has lost power and jams or does something weird and the person up top can't control it, the 5th level of safety is a ground person can go down there and manually pull that lever, and it will slowly release your basket and bring that human down, okay? Once again, I've never used that in 20 years or so now, but it's there if we need it, okay? It's one of the many tools. So, let's operate a Genie. So I lift this up and I step in. It's already, you can feel a little bit of a back and forth. Oh yeah. You can already feel a little bit back and forth on it, and that's fine. It's completely safe, everything's comfy, but you can feel it bounce, feel it give. So when we get in, we want to make sure a few things are going to happen. One, we want to make sure that we are under what we want to work with, right? Under or within reachable distance. The whole idea of this versus the ladder is that I have a platform to stand on and I'm comfortable, right? So if I'm having to do something really hard to get to the piece I want, I'm probably not using the equipment properly, right? The same being said, you can't put a bucket or something in here and stand on it. If the Genie's at 25 feet and you're like, but I need 27, we have to figure out a different solution. Putting a bucket in here and standing in it is against the rules, okay? Same with climbing it. If you're, for demonstration purposes only, if you're standing up here with this extended, you're doing it wrong. Please don't do that, okay? We will find a better solution if we need that extra foot, okay? Those are big things to learn. A lot of people use these wrong. They'll put wood here, they'll sit on it, they'll do all kinds of stuff to get that little extra height. Different tool. It's called engineering the solution, okay? Another one, you don't often want to have all this stuff hanging off you, okay? There will be some tools and stuff that we just kind of have to deal with because we have to have them loose. But the idea behind it is we don't want anything that could slip and fall off and hit somebody underneath you. Because normally, you always have two-man crews on these, okay? You never operate a Genie by yourself. Because if something happens, when's the next time somebody's gonna be in that space? Right? If you hurt yourself in some way, we wanna have two teams, just like power tools or anything else. Working by yourself can be hazardous. So, we take the stuff out of our pockets, keys, things like that. We make sure we're under our device. Oh, look, we want to work on that light. Great. Okay, so we think we're good. Everything's clear around it, and we're not going to hit anything. At this point, we're good to go up. Always make sure you have everything you need for the job so you're not going up and down a lot. So I'll hit this button, and I can hit up on this. It takes a second sometimes to get going because it got to get its juices. This one's limited to 350 pounds. It'll lift a little more. You shouldn't. But for the people who are a little heavier, like myself, it might take a minute to get going. But as you can tell, versus climbing a ladder, this is pretty nice. I can go completely up to a light. Comfortably, I'm probably losing the light, so we won't go too much higher. But now, versus climbing a ladder or bringing a ladder that's 18 feet over, I can touch, adjust, and do whatever I need to on this Genie, comfortably, safely, and without too much issue. Now, you can tell, if you're really looking, that there's just a little wobble in this Genie, right? This is normal. It's safe, it's comfortable, it's not going anywhere. But this is what we're talking about when I was saying the boat. It wobbles back and forth a little bit as you move. And the higher up you get, I'm probably about, what, 12, 13 feet in the air? The higher up you get, this is only about half of its max, the more you'll see that wobble, okay? It's still completely safe as long as you've gone through and made sure that your outriggers and the ground around you, everything is great. If you go through that checklist that we just did, this is completely safe. Once again, if you ever feel uncomfortable, tell somebody, come down. It's a great little tool. They squeak a little bit the older they get. They do operate with bike chain, so that's what you're hearing. You don't really want to put a lot of oil and stuff in them because they bind, but there's some other maintenance stuff we can talk about later. So, I think that's about it for the Genie, folks. I look forward to seeing you come up here and play with it, and see you soon.